This is Fox 12 Now, and we are live from the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom. I'm Greg Nibbler, and thank you for being here with us. We cover a wide range of topics, but we certainly like to explore the natural area here that we live in, and that includes the geography and the geological activity that comes along with that. We know about the volcanoes. We know we have some earthquakes here and the potential for a really big earthquake, or the big one, that will happen somewhere down the line. That's because of that Cascadia subduction zone. And there's a new report out talking about the fault line and just where it actually lies in relation to the coast. And it seems it could actually be a little bit closer, which could mean a more substantial or stronger earthquake when that big one does happen. And we wanted to find out more about this study and some of the other things that they did discover about the geological area that we live in. And we had Erin Moriarty, who is one of the leaders from USGS for this study in particular, join us to talk about the research, what it means, and really explain it out a lot better than I can of what we can expect when it comes to this. Erin, thank you very much for joining us here to talk about this. I'm excited to get into this research and what it really means here too for people in the Pacific Northwest and in Oregon. Before we do any of that, would you mind telling us just a little bit about yourself and the work that you do there with USGS?
Sure. My name is Erin Moriarty, and I'm a seismologist with the USGS. I'm based in Seattle, and I primarily work on issues related to seismic hazard. So anything about earthquakes in the Pacific Northwest and what we can do to keep ourselves safe in the event of an earthquake.
And when it comes to that, anybody who's been in the Northwest for any amount of time is aware of, the big one, of when that could happen or how that could happen. Obviously someday it will. But to get a little bit of understanding of the basic science of that, could you walk us through, what's occurring there when it comes to the faults, and just to know what could happen here at some point in the future?
Sure. So actually the Pacific Northwest is susceptible to 3 different types of earthquakes. And so I like to think about all 3 of them. And so the most common type of earthquake we experience in the Pacific Northwest, or the most common type of moderate magnitude earthquake, are kind of the deep Nisqually style earthquakes. So the last one we had was in 2001. And those are more often around the Puget Sound area. We can also have crustal earthquakes that are very close to the surface. And I do like to remind people that even though these are lower in magnitude compared to the big one, which we'll get to in a second, they can be very damaging because they can be so close to inland cities. And then finally, the big one is the one that people most often want to talk about. So that's where the Juan de Fuca plate is subducting beneath the North American plate. And those 2 plates are stuck together, and every once in a while, those plates slip. And that creates a large earthquake offshore, and also likely a tsunami. And so these earthquakes would be similar to the ones that we saw in 2011 in Japan and 2004 in Sumatra. So very large earthquakes, strong ground shaking, especially for coastal communities, and then likely a tsunami as well.
So yeah, 2 different things really coming after them there when it comes down to that. I mean, when you have the earthquake and then the tsunami afterward. Let's talk about your research, because there's some newer studies just talking about that plate and what that would mean here for the Northwest.
Yeah, and so the study that I recently did was trying to put better constraints on where that plate was, that megathrust fault offshore was, that could generate these large earthquakes. And it's important to know where this fault is, because the closer the fault is to the surface, or the closer the fault is to coastal communities, the stronger the ground shaking will be, because those seismic waves will have less time to sort of peter out as they reach the surface. And so one of the things that we did in 2021 and 2022 was we put out hundreds of these small coffee can size seismometers. They have a little internal battery. They can stay out for 30 days. They're really easy to deploy compared to more traditional seismometers. So the part of the work that I was focused on, we deployed about 200 of these seismometers from Tillamook at the coast to Portland, which is further inland. And then we tried to image where that plate was, the subducting plate was at depth, and try to get a better idea on where the megathrust fault was.
And what were the big findings that you took away from that?
Yeah, so one of the big findings, and this is something that one of a complementary study that was being done at the same time also saw, is that it looks like that megathrust fault is a little bit closer to the surface near the coastline than we previously thought. So about 5 kilometers closer to coastal communities than we thought previously. This isn't a huge change, but it does increase seismic hazard, peak ground acceleration that we would expect from a large Cascadia earthquake by about 10% or so. And so it is important that something like that feeds into our USGS National Seismic Hazard Model and building codes down the line. So I think that is an important finding. And then the other thing that we saw that I wasn't necessarily expecting is that one of the things that we're interested in the Pacific Northwest are these where these deep sedimentary basins are. We have a lot of them. The Puget Sound region is a kind of a combination of a bunch of different sedimentary basins. There's also sedimentary basins near Portland, and the Tualatin Basin, which is kind of west of Portland, and then the Willamette Valley also has sediment as well. And all of that sediment can increase ground shaking. And so the analogy that we like to use is it's like if you have a Jello mold on a plate and you shake that plate, the Jello mold is going to move much more because it's so weak. And that's sort of what happens in a sedimentary basin, that you can have an earthquake, it'll trigger ground shaking, but things that are sitting on top of that weak sedimentary basin will experience stronger shaking. And one of the things that we saw was that there does appear to be a sedimentary basin beneath Tillamook. And you can infer this from some of the geology studies that have been done in the past there, but this is the first time to my knowledge that we've put seismological constraints on how deep that basin is. And then the next step is really for us to take a look at, so now that we know it's there, does it impact ground shaking, and would we expect it to impact ground shaking during a Cascadia earthquake?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you have that Tillamook area there that's very close to the coast. I mean, pretty much at the coast. So you would have that earthquake, the tsunami, but then that sedimentary basin on top of that. So what does that mean for, say, the people of that area now getting a better understanding of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good reminder that we do live in earthquake country, and every area is going to experience an earthquake differently. But you should really be sure to develop or review your emergency plan and supply kit based on local guidelines. And I think it's just that's kind of the message I think that's most important for communities. And then for scientists, I think it's just important that these new scientific findings, again, get put into hazard maps so we can be better prepared in terms of emergency planning or how we design our structures.
Does this kind of knowledge change any understanding of what the tsunami, say, could be as a result of this earthquake?
No, that's not directly related to this work, but it is something that we're always working on. One of the things that myself and my colleagues work on, in addition to what we just talked about a moment ago, is we do large computer simulations of hypothetical earthquakes that could happen in the Pacific Northwest. That's because we don't have recordings of large earthquakes that have happened here before. So doing these large computer simulations is one way to try to better understand what ground shaking would look like. And more recently, kind of a frontier research area is to do a combination, an earthquake simulation combined with a tsunami simulation. So you can look at both the impact of ground shaking and tsunami inundation on coastal communities. So that's ongoing research, but I think it's really important to look at this from a multi-hazard perspective.
Wow, yeah. I mean, so many different factors going into that. I mean, at the end of the day, what do you think is the most important thing that people in the Northwest should know? You know, just based on this research and based on what we already know and the continuing research that you're doing.
Yeah, I think you made a good point early on. So we are in earthquake country, but our kind of moderate to large earthquakes don't happen that frequently. And so people tend to forget. We also have a lot of people that have moved here recently, so they've never experienced an earthquake in this region. And so I think this really just serves as a reminder for people that, again, we do live in earthquake country and we need to be prepared and have an emergency plan and supply kit. And also potentially look into Earthquake Early Warning, getting the Earthquake Early Warning app on your phone. So the USGS and its partners does run the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning system, which tries to detect an earthquake as soon as it starts and send alerts to your phone. And that can give you an extra few seconds to sort of take protective actions. So again, I think this is all just a good reminder for people to try to put those plans in place and think about what they would do in the event of an earthquake.
Fantastic. I did have one other question I just thought of here too. Just with the new findings when it comes to the sedimentary basin and the further research that'll go on that. Now that the Juan de Fuca plate seems to be a little bit closer, is this going to directly change building guidelines there over on the coast or across the Northwest as a whole?
Yeah, so the National Seismic Hazard Model, which is developed by the USGS, sets building guidelines for most of the country. And those maps are very complex in that they take into account all different types of earthquake sources. So, like the ones that we were talking about before, they'll take into account the deep earthquakes, the crustal earthquakes, the Cascadia megathrust earthquakes. So, I do expect that there could be some small changes based on this work, but because it's looking at such a broad array of possible seismic sources, it won't. I don't expect it to be dramatic.
Gotcha. All right, Erin, thank you very much, for joining us here to talk about this, and thanks for all the work that you do, and you and the entire team do, in just bringing this information to everybody so we can be aware of what's happening there, underneath our feet, and how that can affect so many things going forward. But it's just awesome to have you on here to hear about all this. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we do cover a lot of that kind of topics, those kinds of topics here on Fox 12 Now. You can check all of those out on the Fox 12 app, whether that's for Roku, Spotify, Fire TV, or on your phone, or the website as well. And you can take a look through there on the Fox 12 Now tab and take a look at some of the other coverage that we have. But definitely interesting to know for anybody here in the Northwest to know that an earthquake could be even stronger. So one of those big points of advice, get that preparation kit ready just in case for when that should happen. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back here. We've got plenty more for you heading up to our 4 p.m. news. This is Fox 12 Now.